humanity has been on the path of embracing diversity, one last minority is still unrecognized. Experiencers. These are the contactees, abductees, eyewitnesses, and researchers of the UFO phenomenon, paradimensional realms, and contact with other intelligences. Could it be that some protocol, some map, has been created by our visitors to integrate humanity into Paradigm Galactic? Could this be the experiencer path to disclosure? Welcome to Aquarian Radio, Friday night, with Janet Kira-Lessin, Karen Christine Patrick, and the Reverend John Pope, and a guest on the experiencer path.
Hello and welcome to Aquarian Radio, the Experiencer Path Friday. I hope your weekend is shaping up pretty cool. This is Karen Christine Patrick with a great guest, but first I would like to introduce my co-host for this evening, Janet Lessin. Are you there? She might have had to step away for a minute, so let's go ahead and bring on John Pope. John, are you with us?
I am with us. Looking forward to. I've interviewed them before, Chad and Alta, and this is a ride. So buckle up. Get ready for a good one.
Oh, fantastic! Hopefully Janet can join us a little bit later. So let's go ahead and I'll read the information that I have for Chad and Alta Dillard. Chad and Alta met and married in the. Oh, hang on. My computer wiped out my bio. Oh, great. Okay, John, why don't you describe who they are, and I'll read the bio when my computer stops acting up. Don't you love live radio?
Now I'm looking for their bio. I have it somewhere. Anyway, let me just explain how I met them. Of course, I'm on a number of radio shows, either as the host or being interviewed. And Alta actually heard me on a number of radio shows, and as she's a psychic medium that works in the French Quarter, does it for a living, she just had a good feeling about me. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we had a lot of off-air conversations that will remain between us. But her and Chad had encountered a number of roadblocks. People that they thought were honest and genuine people deceived them and tried to bury their story and created just a lot of problems for them. And but she felt comfortable with me and wanted to be on my show and wanted to share her story with the world. And we had that opportunity a few months ago. And after doing that show, I knew I wanted to get her and Chad on this network and some other networks as well, because this story, and it's not even a story, it's a reality of what happened to three people with witnesses, or the three people included as witnesses. It requires much more attention. And I'm not going to tell too much of the story because that's why they're on the show tonight. So anyway, back to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I did find the bio in a different spot. So sometimes our computers help us, and sometimes they're, cause little glitches and issues, and it just makes it fun, right? So here we go. This is what was sent to me, and I love it. Chad and Alta met and married in the early 90s in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas. The marriage was one of destiny, and as Alta would say, arranged. What they did not know is that from that moment on, the couple would partake in a journey into the world of unknown and high strangeness. From aliens to ghosts, also a shapeshifter, from meeting people who have been seen and some unseen, this is a story for the open-minded. Well, that works here for Aquarian Radio on Friday. Definitely open-minded. In 1995, Chad and Alta experienced their first UFO, a massive sight in Hammond, Louisiana. This experience opened their eyes and led them to the well-known French Quarter in New Orleans, where the high strangeness continues. As they tried to take take it day by day to understand their place and purpose at these unusual events. They met a young lady, a coworker named Jacqueline. Little did Jacqueline know that this would be the most unusual bond of her life. In 1997, a night that will live with them to their last breath, Chad Alta and Jacqueline were taken from a street corner in the French Quarter. Alta calls this the night of missing time, where the three have shared their own individual experiences. Everything from Chad's blue being encounter, Alta's blonde female interaction, and an implant found in her arm and 4-digit prints. Their story will take your breath away. The high strangeness continued when, in 1999, Chad and Alta moved to New Mexico, where Chad went face-to-face with a black-eyed adult and other anomalous happenings. The couple moved to Denver, Colorado for their jobs and found them in the middle of the infamous Columbine High School massacre, which occurred April 20th, 1999. In 2001, the couple found their way to Alabama, where Chad works with his dad in the locomotive business. Their stay continues to bring high strangeness into their lives. Strange encounters continued, or should we say followed them, as they discovered a Sasquatch creature, ghosts, red orbs, lizard, monkeys, and so much more. Chad and Alta encountered their second UFO while driving across Mississippi in 2012 and discovered that one of their family members also had a similar experience. The story gets more and more strange. How will this play together? Well, they can't be sure, but what they do know is that it happened. Sit back and listen, and Chad and Alta will tell you. So with that, Chad and Alta, welcome to Aquarian Radio Friday nights.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. And Reverend John, just tremendous gratitude to you for remembering us.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I knew I wanted to get this story out on multiple networks, and so here's network number 2. So it's going to be a fun ride.
Good. Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, what we like to do is let our guests tell their own story for, 10, 15 minutes, whatever you guys are comfortable with, and then let us know. And then I'm sure questions will formulate as we listen, and we take turns, each of the co-hosts asking questions, making comments, and it's just we're all sitting down having coffee together. That's what it's about. Maybe Coke today. It's kind of cold. It's kind of hot. Maybe something cold to drink. Maybe a mint julep. I don't know. But go ahead and give us your story. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll begin this for us. It's a position I think Chad always prefers for me to take, is to, as I say, kind of frame this, the beginnings of this at least. That is, Chad and I, as is said in the bio, I have always been convinced, arranged in 1990 in Little Rock, Arkansas. And with that said, because there's so much to that story, just again because of time constraint, I'll say this to you, that I borrowed the term high strangeness years ago, so I apply that to everything that's paranormal or what I call weird. So when Chad and I are arranged, it happens to be on Valentine's Day, 1990, we discover within 24 hours of this arrangement that Chad's grandfather, who had already crossed over by the time I came into the picture, he had a great deal to do with Chad's childhood, helping, be the kind of father figure as well as his own father in his life. And the world knew him as George, but in actuality, his birth name that's on his tombstone or his gravestone happens to be Alta, which of course is my name. And then, if that wasn't strange enough for me, we also discovered that the grandfather's last name happens to be Duncan, and that happens to be my mother's maiden name. And so upon learning that, immediately within 24 hours, it was a very strange feeling for me, to say the least, internally. I was working very hard, I felt, to try to not have Chad see that frightened me. It was so strange, I couldn't get my brain wrapped around it, because I come from a very strange history in the sense of my early childhood and what have you. And again, it takes an awful lot of time to go into all those details. So when I discover of course, that Chad's grandfather and I share essentially the same name. That's just beyond words for me. And I've said this before, I think of myself kind of as an odds girl. What are the odds? What are the odds? And so I'm told that I am mixed Indian, American Indian from a reservation area of Arizona. My mother left that area when I'm 6 months old, but made sure and traveled me around the country and places in the world, but always made sure that I knew that I was of this mixed blood and that I always had my regalia, my native regalia, attending a lot of powwows throughout my life and what have you. So the point is that I also understood that we had no family in Arkansas or a connection to Arkansas other than my mother had moved there. And I followed her. And to the best of our knowledge, Chad has no native blood in there. He's got a very strong family and a lot of knowledge about his family. And the one thing we could never understand, or nor could we get any information on, as to how in the world his grandfather ended up with the name Alta. And so with that said, that's our beginnings. And then, if I might, then I will fast forward us to 1995. We now have relocated to Louisiana. We're on the outskirts of a small community called Hammond, Louisiana, and Hammond is a small college town or university town. Chad and I are living in a very rural area. As I've said before, it's like swampy almost. And we moved to Louisiana extremely naive, very naive. And so we decided one evening, I think it was on a Friday evening after work, to go into town and have dinner and drinks. Also, Chad and I have never had children, so it's always just been him and I. So as we're driving into town, I'll mention, and then I'll have Chad describe to you what we saw. But the sun has not completely set yet, so it's still somewhat light out. I'll have Chad describe to you what happened to us.
Well, we were just coming into town, and we went around this bend in the road where there was a group of trees, and back behind this group of trees was the local Walmart Supercenter shopping center. We get around this group of trees, and when we do, we look up into the sky, and there's this craft, and I would say it was lower than cloud level, and the size of it was just, huge. It was like what people would call a mothership or something like that. It was just, it was kind of the shape of like a rectangle, but not as wide in the front as it was in the back, and it was laying long ways, The bottom of it was, seemed to be very smooth. There's 2 or 3 lights in the front, 3 or 4 lights in the back. Again, moving very, very slowly across the sky almost. And we both kind of look up at it. Now I'm driving, so, and this is on the right side of the road. Alta looks over at me. I look back up at it really quick, focus my attention back to the road, and I was, without even us talking about it, we were like, okay, if we don't acknowledge it, if we don't see it, it won't see us. So we went on to dinner. We ate. Never spoke about it. Never mentioned it again. The next morning, we remember either like on the radio or in the newspaper, there was an article about it where somebody else or other people had seen it. Now, during, the experience, I never saw anybody, driving off the road or, pulling over or, fingers pointing in the sky or anything like that. But apparently it had been reported by other people.
Yes, go ahead.
And, yeah, that was...
So essentially, Chad's handing the phone back off to me. So essentially, we have this experience Chad has said it relatively very calmly. I, on the other hand, indicated my true emotion was pure shock, and I've stated this before and very consistently, my brain exploded. I didn't ever understand what that statement meant until we had this experience, and as I said, my brain exploded. Chad and I, neither one of us, just for content, had no interest in this area at all prior to this happening to us. We were not interested in UFOs. We weren't interested in sci-fi necessarily. He might have had a little more interest than I did. I had none. And so this was, again, an experience that couldn't happen that happened. So this is in 95. Within a very short amount of time after this experience, we then choose to leave that area and move to the French Quarter, which was relatively an hour or so away. Again, very naive. When we moved to the quarter, we have no idea what we're walking into. And maybe that was the good side of it and the bad side of it. We were not financially prepared at all for the cost to live in the French Quarter. We had no idea. So we felt very pulled, and we were determined that we were going to live there and create a life. And so as it turns out, because of economics, we have to start out on the outskirts of the quarter. It's about a 13-block square, I believe. I've never actually measured it, but that's my understanding. So we start off on the perimeter of the quarter. And again, because of economics, extremely expensive to live in the quarter, we end up in an apartment that happens to be above what we understand is the authentic or the original voodoo temple of New Orleans. Now, again, Chad and I had no interest nor any knowledge about voodoo at all. I come from a mixed Indian background, as I've said, with my regalia. That is my heritage. That's my understanding. Chad, coming from his background, neither of us having any connection with this environment at all. The buildings that this temple consists of is a large 2-story building, 2 apartments upstairs, the voodoo temple downstairs, and right next to the voodoo temple is another small building, a small little complex or what have you that was converted into a shop for tourism. Huge courtyard. If I understood correctly, at the time we moved there, it was the largest courtyard in the quarter. The voodoo priestess had another large structure that was the perimeter of the courtyard. That was where she lived, her residence. At the end of her residence was a literal chicken coop full of live chickens. Across from her, another set of buildings that were original slave quarters that had been converted into small efficiency apartments. If I understand right also that these buildings or these structures were built in the 1600s. So we're fascinated. It's very silly on our part, but we are fascinated. Also, couldn't beat the price for what we were being offered for this efficiency apartment that's above and to the left of the voodoo temple itself. We discover very quickly after we make this move that, because we're going to completely paint it, and make it adorable, and do what we do. And we discover very shortly that this voodoo priestess is also connected to movie companies out of Hollywood, what have you. Anybody who was interested in creating movies that had anything to do with the voodoo genre, she was connected to them. So that meant we had to deal with movie people trying to get in and out of our apartment, which was never fun. And watching filming going on, it might sound exciting. It was not. It was just a real problem for him and I, for both Chad and I, and we stopped being so naive relatively quickly. We had tremendous amount of what I feel is a very convoluted sense of paranormal high strangeness experiences, all ranging from missing time or time slip, what appeared to be, and I accent appeared to be because we've discovered, folks They hear what they choose to hear out of what we say. So I just would like to preface, I've never said that this was the Virgin Mary, but what I've always said is this being appeared to me like a Virgin Mary type. Also, ghosties. I use the word ghosties to take the scary out of it. And Chad had a very interesting experience on his own, parallel of mine. So I'll have him share that with you as we're preparing now to move you to that night of missing time.
Yeah, this was just within the first week of us moving into this apartment, and I'm asleep in bed, and, you know, being the French Quarter and as old as it is and as close as, you know, it's just like one big building, really, you know, with streets in between them. And so you didn't have to be dirty to have bugs, you know, especially the palmetto bugs and all that. So I'm laying there in bed, and I kept feeling like something was crawling on my chest. So I'd wake up and I would scratch, and then I'd go back to sleep, and a few minutes later I'd wake up and scratch. And, you know, if it was something crawling around on me, it would be in different spots. You know, it wouldn't be in the same exact spot. So I get up the next morning, go to work, and this vision starts coming to me. And I remember this very short-statured. Now, I could only see him from his chest up, but he looked like a small, a smaller man, African, no shirt. He had some, like, trinket beads on, trading beads on, short afro, and I was laying there in bed, and he would take and he was kind of horizontal over me, you know, floating in the air, and he would take his finger and kind of tickle me with the tip of his finger onto my chest, and when I went up to scratch, he would pull back. And again, this happened 3 to 4 times, you know, throughout the night. And I'd actually dug a couple layers of skin off. You know, I had really, you know. And so I get to work. You know, this all comes to me. I get home. Alta, being Native American, we've always had a smudge stick, or, you know, the cedar and sweetgrass and all. So I get home and I get the smudge and I get it going, and I'm like, you know, hey, you know, it's all cool, you know, you can stick around, you know, I'm going to paint the apartment, we're going to have us a really nice place, just leave me alone. And I never had any other issues. About a month or so later, another couple moved into, they had a little apartment in the shop down below, and they had been married by the voodoo priest who had died recently before we had moved there. And they start showing me their wedding pictures, and I'm like, and they show me the picture of the voodoo priest, and I'm like, wow, that's who, you know, I saw above my. And I told them the same story I just told you guys, and they're like, yeah, that sounds like him. You know, he was a trickster. He would test you sometimes to see, you know, to make sure that you were, you know, worthy of being in his presence, or test you to see if he wanted to hang out with you. So, and that was kind of an eye-opening, you know, experience for the French Quarter, because it was just really scary, creepy, exciting.
That was not an unenjoyable experience. Well, you know, here I like to say all our normal is para, so that would be kind of interesting and fun. Yeah, so that's good. Go ahead and continue, but we want to get to your night and missing time. I'm very fascinated by that.
Okay, so just a little taste of what Chad has shared with you, and again, we were having all kinds of very bizarre experiences. We leave that. We worked very hard in the quarter to kind of build our lives and income and good name for ourselves, and we realized that we cannot stay there. And we just don't match, we don't mix, we need to not live there any longer. And for whatever reason we were there, we were having these experiences, again, for whatever the reason was. So we finally end up moving right into the heart of the quarter, which is considered, the most, one of the most, as Chad's saying, desirable areas. High strangeness involved in us moving into that location as well. In this case, it's kind of the polar opposite of our first location. This location is furnished. We're getting it for nothing. Basically, the man that owns this building, it's several stories, a small courtyard and small buildings in the back. This gentleman is a veterinarian, a doctor, and this townhouse is full of Louis you name it, 16th furniture, marble. We had 2 carved fireplaces. To express to you the difference, the polar difference of what we were going through in a very short amount of time. Like within a year or so of moving there. So this is our environment. We're starting to feel very homey. And my mother comes to visit from out of state, and I introduce her to everybody. She's recognized as a mixed Native woman, an elder, and she's very loving, and everyone loves her. So we're having a great time. So Chad and I decide, along with my mom, but kind of privately, we're going to get my mom moved there. And we'll pre-rent her a mother-in-law cottage in our courtyard. We're building up to that night of missing time. It was not meant to be. Everything was planned. My mother was going to arrive for my 40th birthday. At the time, I obviously just said turned 40. Chad was 30. I'm 10 years older than Chad. And our friend that was with us that evening was 24 at the time. So, as it would be, rather than my mother arriving for my birthday, she died on my birthday. And long distance, and a very insane experience. 3 months later, now this was in May, so 3 months later now, around September, it's kind of a slower time in the quarter, but there's always tourism. Something is always going on. And for people who don't understand the French Quarter, it's a 24/7 kind of environment. The clubs very seldom ever go to sleep. Doors don't shut kind of thing. So we're 3 months later after my mother's death, and I have been suffering immensely. So has Chad, but he's managed it much better than I have. We've got a friend who's also a coworker in this amazing shop that I work in the middle of the quarter. Now, our shop was only 2 blocks or so from where we lived. Our friend is kind of the quasi-manager this particular evening. She asked me if I wanted to go out and have dinner and drinks. I accepted. We'd never done it before. I tell her, let's call Chad and invite him because he likes to play with the girls. He's just smart like that, and the girls like him to play with us because he's just fun. So we call, and of course he wants to come join us, so he just walks over to the shop. As I said, it's only a couple blocks. So that particular evening starts around 9:30. The 3 of us walk out of the shop, and remember taking note, it was 9:30 because she's locking the doors. Now, she had driven her car. She didn't live in the quarter. She lived across the river. So you either took the ferry across back and forth or you drove. In her case, that particular day, and there's a reason for sharing that, she chose to drive her car. She parked her car up the street from our shop on one end of the French Quarter. Our plan was to just be spontaneous. We were going to cross the quarter, those 13 blocks, with no plans, just stop wherever we felt like, being very spontaneous. Our friend had never been married before and had no children. Chad and I have never had children, and so we have the night to ourselves. From the very moment that we started that night, I won't take up all the time. Again, these stories are very involved, these experiences. But from the moment we started our evening at 9:30, as soon as we stepped outside of the shop, I'll mention this, I remember making note of and saying it out loud. In essence, it feels weird out here. Like the energy feels weird. It feels off. And that's not something I go around generally saying. I'm not that kind of person. But I happened to say it that evening because it felt just like what I described. It felt off. As we began to walk towards the famous Bourbon Street, that's where we're going to start, and just begin on one end of the street and work our way all the way across the quarter. And as I said, from the very beginning, from the jump, it was strange, just strange. And besides the strangeness of the whole thing, there were very few people roaming the streets. There were nobody in any of the clubs. There were nobody, if there were restaurants, there was no wait staff. There were no patrons. Each club that we stopped at 3 of them, that would also involve restaurants, not just bars. There were no people in any of these places. That's impossible, and that's unheard of. We're not thinking anything necessarily Twilight Zone-y, but that's the word I use for how it felt around us, like we'd stepped into the Twilight Zone. When we finally get to the end of the quarter, we're very frustrated, to say the least, the 3 of us. We decide at around 11 o'clock, this is what the 3 of us remember. We've been out there an hour and a half. We've gone through very strange experiences just in the sense of the absence of people in all the locations. That now at this point, I just want to go home. So I tell Chad, I just want to go home. He's in somewhat agreement with me, and then that's the last thing the 3 of us collectively remember is 11 o'clock being on this street corner. And then the next thing I know, it's the next morning. The sun is blaring through my window. I'm not laying down. I'm sitting up in my living room with my legs crossed. As I've said before, I didn't wake up. I came to. My eyes popped open. I'm rubbing my arms. I'm looking around my house, like just in such unbelievable disbelief, and I'm in shock. And where the hay is Chad, and where the hay is our friend, and oh, my God, and, I can't begin to tell you the terror, the controlled chaos that's going on inside of me, and on top of it, I feel something in my upper arm that's somewhat protruding. So, again, I'm not sure how much time we have. I will state this, and then I'll hand this to Chad so he can at least, I feel, describe, if you're interested. We got regression done for Chad several years later after this event took place with the 3 of us in 97. In early 2000s, we found somebody to have him get regressed by. In his regression,
That's
I'll have
fine.
him share with you.
Yeah, keep going. This is interesting, and it would be nice to know what he remembered. So go ahead.
Right. So before I hand this off to him, I'll make note of this, that I'm the only one apparently out of the 3 of us that as I say the words returned, were returned with something in my body. Other people are using the word implant. I've never used that word. I always refer to them as unknowns, the unknown. And then I also am the only one out of the 3 of us that appears to have been returned with what I call memory of the in-between. No memory of coming off the street, no memory of being returned home, but I have a very distinct memory of the in-between. And so I'll have Chad share with you what the regression brought out in him. Please take notice, he describes this to you, though, that I'm not in his experience. And if we have time and I share with you what I have memory of, he and my friend are not in my experience.
Yeah, like I always say, I remember everything just like Alta has explained. Now, what comes out in my regression is we're standing, mid-block, it's kind of Alta sitting on the stoop. I'm standing in front of her. And I remember kind of looking around the corner, and I could see this bright light just gets my attention. I could see it coming from around the corner. I could see it through kind of the windows of the shop that was right there on the corner. And so I get the girl's attention, and we come around the corner, and, I mean, we're standing there, 30 seconds maybe at the most, and we can see this bright white light. It was probably 12 foot in diameter. It was about 15 feet off the street and about half a block down the street. we sit there, we look at it, it comes towards us and just kind of engulfs us. It abducts us. And this is why we named our book Abduction, or Abducted, I'm sorry. And, so my next memory is I'm walking down this corridor, this hallway. It's kind of gently turning to the right. It's the walls and the floor and everything, there's no rivets, no bolts, no seams, no nothing, just very smooth metallic substance. I could see preferably to my left a tall blonde female walking beside me. Now, I didn't turn to look, but this does describe our friend. Now, in front of us is a small being, probably about 3 foot tall, 3.5 foot tall, big bulbous head, kind of a pale gray skin tone. He's wearing this very skin-tight black jumpsuit, almost like a skin diver or scuba diver. He has substance. He's like the thin grays that you see on TV. He had substance. He kind of waddled when he walked. He was like a dwarfish. I never saw him from the front, so I didn't know what his face or anything looked like, or I don't remember seeing him from the front. My next memory is I'm in this room, and it just seems infinite. It just seems like there are no walls. It just seems huge. I can't see. It's very dark. I could see my immediate, and I could see off in the distance to my left, I could see a tall blonde female laying on an examining table. She was nude, but the bodies were censored. It's kind of blurry, kind of like they do body parts on TV, from head to toe. There's 3 beings around her, 2 very tall, or 3 very tall beings, 2 on each side, or 1 on each side, and then 1 in her head. She never seemed to be in distress or anything like that, or in pain. They were very, like I said, they were 7-8 foot tall, very bug-like, big almond-shaped eyes, very small mouth, real close to their chin. They were wearing these cloaks, almost like a Jesuit priest or a Grim Reaper without the hood, I focused my attention back to my immediate, and I look over to my right, and there's this little blue being, and he looks a lot like the ones that you do see on TV, what they call the grays, big bulbous head, almond-shaped eyes, but his presence, his aura, and his color, he was this bright, vibrant blue. And his aura, his presence seemed to be that of like a priest / healer / shaman professor. He goes over and he picks up this box. He has it in his right hand. He takes his left hand and puts it inside the box. And when he pulls his hand out, there's this substance kind of free-floating a couple of inches off of his hand. And it looks kind of like that slime stuff that the kids play with, but it was very contained. It was undulating and moving around, and it was the same color blue as he. There was kind of like metal or kind of glittery flakes floating in it. It was somewhat transparent. He takes his right hand. Now he only has 4 digits. And he takes his right hand and he puts his 2 middle fingers up almost like in a peace sign, and his outer fingers folded in, almost kind of like you see depictions of Jesus or Buddha or something like that. And when he does that, he's got it kind of right in front of this substance, and this substance starts spinning. And the faster it spun, the blueness and the glittery stuff kind of dissipate out of it, and it's kind of floating around it, like a like the night, the sky around the sun, the planet. slowing down, and it turned into this double-pointed pyramid crystal. And I remember thinking to him, why are you showing this to me? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer. This is something, very important. And I remember him telling me that I will know in time, or when it's time. My next memory is I'm in this other room, two that are very straight, one of them that's kind of concaved. The walls are, again, very, no rivets, no bolts, no seams, very smooth. There's a very large overstuffed leather chair in the middle of this room, and I remember thinking how out of place it looked, and it's comfortable, but it's not. And so I walked a little closer to the wall that's concaved, and what I thought was a solid wall was practically a large window. I could see through the whole wall, and the wall is long. I mean, it's probably 15, long and 12 foot wide, tall. And I can see through it, and I can see the stars, and it's like I'm out in the galaxy. I can see stars and planets and all this, and I'm kind of standing there in awe. And then all of a sudden, this little craft shoots past, and it's just outside whatever I'm in. I mean, it's just outside the window, just a few feet. And it goes past, and it's about 9-10 foot past me, and it stops and comes back, and it's just outside the window, just kind of hovering. And it's like it was surprised to see me as I was it. And it's probably about 3 foot long, 2 foot wide at the widest, kind of a rugby shape or football shape. There was little wires and little antennas and little lights blinking and moving around. I could feel intelligence coming out of it. It sat there for maybe 30 seconds at the most, and then shoots back off at a high speed. And my next memory is waking up in bed the next morning.
Wow, there's a lot there. So I think we should start questions and comments. And John, I'm going to give you the floor first because there might be some of this you want to point out or questions that you want to ask, and we'll find out if Janet's with us as well after that. But go ahead, John.
One thing I wanted to mention, their new book, Orbducted in the French Quarter. I had a chance to flip through it and look through it some. And near the beginning, Alta, you mentioned how when you were a little kid that you were being tested as a psychic. That they had these, I don't know, they put you in some kind of environment and they test you with these cards to see if you can figure out what is on the card without looking at it. And Karen, who is hosting the show tonight, she had the identical experience growing up also as a child and gets pulled into these like alternative schools for gifted children and this and that. So I was curious if you actually, you and Karen would probably have a lot to talk about that whole subject alone.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead and, how old are you when you got tested with the cards?
So let me first of all thank you, Reverend John, for mentioning the book and the support to us. And it's music to our ears, my ears in particular, to hear this about you, Karen. I have no childhood memories at all until I'm around 9. There's no memories. There's nothing there. I also understood that I was very sick. My mother said that I was a preemie. I was a 7th-month baby, is the way she's told this story, and that I was very sick. And so I've got no memories prior to 9. There's no baby pictures of me at all until I'm 2. And then there's too many pictures as far as I'm concerned because I'm very anti-photo now. My first memory is sitting in what appears to be a hospital setting with what appears to be a doctor in front of me, or let me just say this, it's a man, an adult, dark-haired man wearing a lab coat, I'm sitting on one end of a table. He's on the other end. There's a little wall between us. And my memory jumps in right at that point of understanding that I am repeating, or it is what their determination is for me to repeat the symbols mentally that I can see, just through the mind. And so that's my first memory. Now, my mother, thank goodness, confirmed that for me, because she tells me, and the few people in her life she ever trusted with anything, because she trusted really no one. She had a very mysterious past as well. And so, and I'm not raised with family, so I have nobody to ask any questions to or connection to. What I discover is we lived in Aurora, Colorado, in an apartment complex directly across the street, within walking distance from a huge military hospital called Fitzsimmons Hospital. This would have been taking place in about 66, I would say, or 67, and that is my first memory. Let me also add that the reason, it was never our intention to go public, Chad and I, ever. We never intended this. This was done kind of sort of backdooring, where we were asked finally to come forward, and we accepted. So one of my biggest objectives has always been to get help, whatever that meant, because, again, we're very naive. I'm not any longer, but I was. And so for me personally, because I have so much childhood mystery, without any help, somebody guided me to connect with Grant Cameron. He was kind enough to very briefly respond to me. And as I've said before, I'm grateful for that, because so many have never responded to me. This gentleman, because he's involved in writing originally about presidents and UFOs and all these secrets and so on, I'm determined this is going to be the route that's going to help me get records. So he very abruptly and very directly made it clear to me that would be to no avail. I don't remember exactly the language he used, but it was short, sweet, and very direct, which is, I'm out of luck. That won't happen. What I did discover is that Fitzsimmons Hospital has moved only in this last year or so. So it's relocated. I can't remember exactly, because I was in such shock that it existed. And but that's my stumbling block. So, Karen, you're the first that I've ever heard of anybody on a very direct level has been involved in anything like this.
Oh, wow. Well, I've been telling this story, and as I've been doing it, boy, I've been triggering the heck out of a lot of people. But what I found out these cards were is they're called Zener cards, Z-E-N-E-R, and they have sort of archetypal images. So they have like a triangle, a square, like wavy lines.
Right.
There's a couple other ones. You can look them up, Z-E-N-E-R, online. And they were developed for testing for ESP, I believe, through the auspices of Caltech, and I don't remember the guy who designed them. But I had the test given to me I was in a gifted intelligence program in the first grade in the California school system in the Bay Area, and I was brought to the vice principal's office. I thought I was in trouble. And this man he looked like a professor with his sort of looking over the top of his glasses at me, kind of sort of wavy, messy gray hair, and he had a bad tweed suit on. And I knew he wasn't a teacher. And he proceeded to give me a psych eval without my parents' permission or knowledge. And he tested me with this mat. So I had a mat in front of me of the symbols. And at first he showed me he had these cards, and I was supposed to guess. And he showed me a couple at first to kind of maybe get my confidence up. I'm not sure what. And then after that, he didn't tell me the results of my test. But I come to find out later there was a program called Project Talent in California that on the front end of it was supposed to find and help gifted and talented children to go eventually track towards college and a career. But behind the scenes, they were actually looking for psychically gifted children because we were in the Cold War era there in the 60s, and they were looking, they found out the Russians had a pretty extensive parapsychology program going. And so then they were just apparently extensively testing a lot of kids. And I've heard all kinds of stories. One gentleman got tested, and then he suddenly became very sleepy, and he fell asleep at the desk and woke up at his desk at school. I mean, it just goes on and on how these different kids from different eras, somewhere between the 60s and the 80s, I don't know too many after the 90s, got these tests. And then come to find out later, quite a few of these kids tracked into clandestine programs, sometimes the secret space program, and were used as in their psychic capacity, kind of, unbeknownst. They went to special schools. Some kids were tracked out of, they did gifted and talented, and then they eventually started tracking these kids toward what I found out later, special ed, so they could have more control of them, because in special ed, they could convince you were crazy, So it's a pretty involved story, but it sounds like they were also maybe testing kids in the hospital, too. I didn't even think about that, but it is a captive audience, right? That would make sense to me. Yeah, wow.
If I might, because I've spent now 20 years as a researcher, just private, just for my own sanity and for my own sake. So much of what you just shared I've been very aware of long ago because, again, it's been my story. But if I might add very quickly, my mother claimed that when she left my father when I'm about 6 months old, so now we're talking the end of 57, the beginning of 1958, she claims that while she's driving across a highway in the desert, that's all that I know, highway in the desert, that she would change the language every once in a while. She never told this very often. And please keep in mind, again, I had no interest in this. This was not a subject I wanted to know anything about because I didn't like it and it wasn't interesting. But back when I'm young and she would tell this story, it would embarrass me, and so I just thought she was crazy. And the story was, very brief, is that while she's driving with me, a small metallic craft, or she would say a UFO, came out of the sky and stopped her on the road or on the highway. Now, as I've said before, I never challenged my mother, nor did anybody else. So the story begins and stops right there. It is also interesting that I began school because I found records in California. So now we're talking, obviously, but apparently I missed a great deal of school when I'm very young because of being very sick. So, again, this mystery is so on my end of it because of having, a couple of comments out of a mother that I no longer physically have here to ask any more about. And the Fitzsimmons Hospital, of course, is a military hospital. It was very active, of course, through NAM, and apparently was still in motion, whatever that means, up until this last year or so. So, again, lots of high strangeness all the way around.
Oh, wow. Well, do we have Jenna with us? Did she make it back? She's earlier than us. She's Hawaii, so she's in the middle of her day. We're at the end of our day. And so sometimes... Oh, she's back. Hey, Janet. We're at the round-robin point where it's your turn. So go ahead.
Well, I just literally walked in the door, so I'm not sure where we are in the conversation. But give me like 2 minutes to catch my breath and then come back to me, okay?
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, I guess I had a question besides commenting about the cards. Chad, did you have any kind of testing or anything in your early childhood also that was sort of presaging what kind of happened to you?
Yeah, no, I don't ever remember being tested or anything like that as a child for anything like that. Okay.
Yeah, so do either one of you guys want to comment, like going up into your missing time? It impresses me that you didn't really have an interest and you didn't know what you were getting into. generally speaking, like from the time that you naively or however you were called or pulled to go, I just went to New Orleans in May, so I get it where it's just like these tight little streets and really a sense of a much older city than almost anywhere in the United States, and a lot of energy there. And I can't imagine there not being any people because we didn't get to be there in the evening, but we were in there in the afternoon, and the streets were just crowded, you know, wall to wall with people. And of course the restaurants, if you went into, like, there's no people in the restaurants, there's no people in the wait staff or any of that. I can't even imagine that because everywhere we went, all the restaurants were full. Everyone was, you know, eating that really good food and everything, and there was people everywhere you went. I mean, starting early afternoon, the party starts early there apparently. So I'm just wondering what changed over the course of time in your feelings about New Orleans, and what did you have to ramp on really quick in order to function there and figure out why you were there?
Forgive both of us. We're a little puzzled. We're not sure exactly what you're asking. But
well,
if I may,
you kind of had, you had kind of a naivete, and what was the crash course in, or you know what changed in the time that you were living there prior to the night of missing time that you began to realize was maybe why you were there or what you were supposed to learn there?
I'm honest to admit to you, I'm clueless. I have no answers. I have no answers, none at all. This is what we've done, what Chad and I both have chosen to do is speak on behalf of our friend as well, because her experience was completely different than mine completely different than Chad's. And so what we've tried to do is express it exactly the way we experienced it. But in all honesty, it just becomes more questions. Just more questions. As far as we're concerned, there are no answers. We've not found any.
Oh, okay. Are you able to talk about your friend's experience at all? Like what was happening to her at that same time frame?
Right. So what happens with her, if I may, let me back up very quickly to give you a little background. She is, as I said, 24 at the time. She's tall, slender, long blonde hair, attractive, a very pragmatic kind of personality, no drama queen at all. I don't remember ever seeing her cry. She's a fixer kind of person. She's very interested in the physical earth and its well-being, her well-being, his well-being. And so even at 24, this was a very strong personality that she had. So what happens with her is just a brief time before that night of missing time with the three of us, she's dating a guy very briefly, just as I say, for a minute. And his name is Will. And he's her polar opposite. He's got very long, dark, black hair. He's very attractive, but he's got a darkness about him, so I always called him Dark Boy. And again, at 40, I could get away with that. I was so much older than everybody else, and that's how I thought of him. She only saw him, as I said, for a minute, for a very brief time. When she decided to not see him any longer, that she wanted to tell him pretty much the Dear John or the Dear Will letter, she invited him over to her apartment out on her front porch. It's during the daytime, so it's, broad daylight that this is taking place. She says he's only a couple inches in front of her face. She says that as she's telling him, I like you, but kind of language, he's becoming so emotionally distraught internally, that's the way she's describing it, where she can see a change in him, of him getting very upset. And then she says that he turned into a wolf. A wolf. Now, that's how she said it. She said her head snapped away, just like mine did when I saw that floating city in the sky in shock. She was beyond shock. Her head flipped away. She said when she turned her head back, that he had shifted back again into the human form and then shifted a second time in front of her face. Now, again, she's only a couple inches in front of him. She's not had any alcohol. She's had no drugs. She said that she called him on it. She said in a very direct, and I'll clean the language up, she said, you just turned into an effing wolf. She said in a very startled voice, And in his eyes, he repeated to her, "You saw that." So it absolutely confirmed to her, not that she needed it, that she saw what she saw. Now, that night of missing time, she remembers exactly as Chad and I, this very bizarre night, an hour and a half out there, to the best of our knowledge, because we've been challenged to the hilt, that we obviously were drugged. Well, none of us have any recollection of anybody drugging us because there were no people around. And alcohol, we didn't drink. So we can only share as we experienced it. She says that she remembers everything as we do. She's very blank on crossing the quarter, more so than I'm very acute about it, so is Chad. She was back in the day, because this is 20 years ago. We're still in contact. It's not something she likes to discuss, and nor will she ever come forward with it. But she wrote it, and I had her put it in writing, and I had her sign it for our benefit, because I told her we were going to pursue this to try to understand and get help. So she indicates that when she wrote the story out several years later, or a few years later, we noticed that she's pretty blank about, because we remember exactly where we stopped and what we experienced. She doesn't have a lot of memory of the crossing the quarter. She says that we do, and she knows that we do, and she gives us permission to speak on her behalf. She says that she remembers 11, just like Chad and I, on that corner. And the next thing Jacqueline knows, our friend, she says she's behind the steering wheel now of her moving car. The car is miles away from where she parked the car that morning. She says it's somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning. So from 11 until then, it's blank. There's nothing there. She says her car is moving slowly, and it hit a parked car, and it knocked off her rear view mirror. She said this is what jolted her to. Now she says this car is driving, and she's trying to get her consciousness. And she said next thing she knows, she's over at that Wolfie boy's house. Now, he lives in a neighborhood that's not a nice neighborhood for somebody such as her at 3 or 4 in the morning. She never intended to see him again, ever. And I'm pretty sure Chad and I are the only ones she ever shared that story with, because she knew I was mixed Indian. And that's not something she'd go public with. She would not tell other people this. So she says that when she gets there, now what I'm about to describe to you as quickly as I know how, keep in mind, to us, as we repeat this, it sounds just like a very either well-written or very poorly written scary movie. Because she said when she drives up in front of this big house that's been converted into apartments, it's got a big iron gate around it that's always locked, but of course not this night or this morning. She said the gate is wide open. She gets out of the car, goes up the steps. He's apparently got the apartment downstairs. She said the door is open. I believe it's a screen door. She said he's sitting under a light, so he must have an overhead light. And he's playing guitar. She said he looks at her, he stops playing guitar, he puts the guitar down. She walks up into the house. She said she starts to become hysterical, like a controlled hysteria. She said she starts to cry herself, hysterical. She said he puts his arms around her and he guides her into a room. She said he lays her down. She said she hysterically cried herself to sleep. She said her eyes open up. She's dressed. She realizes where she's at. She said that she thinks it's probably only been an hour or so later, so it's got to be somewhere at this point, probably 5-ish, 6-ish in the morning. And she said she got the H out of there and never looked back. Now, to finish that little piece about her experience with this insanity called Wolfie Boy. Now, this happens to us in 97. Chad and I we ended up leaving. We had a lot of life in between 97 and 2001. But again, fast forwarding this story, just to tie that story up for you, in 2001, Chad and I imploded. We came apart. So Chad chose to leave New Orleans, go work for his father in Alabama. I chose to stay behind in the quarter. That was not a good move on either of our parts. And so I'm out walking one day after work in the quarter. It's packed. Sidewalks are, as you described them, packed. It's a beautiful day. There's no humidity, and it's just beautiful. So I'm so taking that in because that's highly unusual. I hear somebody holler my name across the crowd. When I see who's hollering at me, it's a very tall, unusually tall, slender, old friend of ours who's originally from Montauk, New York. He's an artist. We hadn't seen him in several years. He wants me to sit down with him for a moment and have a drink at one of the little outdoor cafes. We sit down to just play catch-up. When he discovers Chad and I have separated, he's extremely distressed because nobody could imagine that this would happen to Chad and I. And, sorry, what's that?
You never saw us apart.
As Chad is saying, never saw us apart. So as I'm giving him the very brief details, all of a sudden, out of that serious conversation, he changes the subject. Just like that, just like I just did. And he said, "Did you hear what happened to Will?" Now, I'm in shock once again because I didn't even know he knew this person. And to bring that name up out of nowhere, it just, I still can't get my brain wrapped around it. So I'm looking at him beyond puzzled, and I said, "You mean Dark Boy? How do you know him?" And he, that's not so strange because artists and the circles that, we somewhat kind of moved about in and the shop, and maybe not as strange as the rest of it, but it was awfully strange to me to have that coming at me after sharing with him that Chad and I have separated. So when I say to him, "No, I didn't know you knew him, what happened?" And he said, he went around telling everybody he had to catch a bus out of town because the aliens were after him. That was his words. Now, please keep in mind, anybody hearing us, I've never used the word aliens. I've never even used the word ET. I don't use any of the common language that everyone else is using, and certainly what people have applied to us. So I say to you, those words are not my words. These were coming out of our friend saying that very strange character had left town because the aliens were after him. So that is the story, in a sense, of our friend. Our friend then went on a few years later to get a degree in environmental science. She's built a life for herself and a son that she had a year or so after this experience, and that's now in college. And, she's just created an amazing life for herself because she's chosen to go a completely different way.
Okay. Well, I know people who've done that. I don't know how they do that, but, it's basically block everything out, and they can't integrate it into the reality, and that's, I don't know if it's, I'd like to have that option, right? John, would you like to jump in here and, bring out any more that you'd like to know and ask a question, make a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to change the subject and promote some things that they do. They have unique rabbit shawls. So the letter U, N-E-E-K, rabbit shawls. And they have a website also, which is btsy.com/shop/the-U-N-E-E-K rabbit. Anyway, and you can go to their website, and they have all these beautiful shawls, a lot of them with if not all of them, with a Native American motif, if you will. So why don't you comment on that, and also tell us about your Facebook pages as well.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, we have the shawls, and you can find both our Unique Rabbit shawl page and our Abducted page on Facebook. We make the shawls, and we've tried to take the Native American prayer shawl or powwow, ladies' powwow shawl, and kind of turn it into something that, you know, anybody could wear, as far as, like, you know, if they want to wear it out on the town. A lot of people use them for meditation and prayer. We've also tried to fuse them with other cultures, different fabrics that aren't so traditional Native American. So, yeah, please check us out on Facebook. Again, it's Unique Rabbit, and it's spelled U-N-E-E-K, Rabbit Shawls. No rabbits are harmed in the making of our shawls. It's just one of my mother-in-law's favorite jokes that we named it after. And then, of course, you know, our book, Abducted, in the French Quarter. So you can find both of those on Facebook.
Excellent. So I'm looking at the pictures, and I know that Alta does not like the term implant, and I understand that because we don't know what they are. So the term unknown, I think, fits perfectly. But I'm looking at these pictures, pretty amazing. I'm pretty convinced, and I've never had myself checked, that I have multiple implants. And I was talking to Lori McDonald about what I thought to be an implant, and she said, when you bleed, it's always out of your left nostril. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And I said, you know, do you think that's a MyLab implant, or do you think that's an ET implant? She said that she believed it to be one that was placed in there by the ETs. Nobody can be perfectly sure. But if I recall, in one of our past conversations, Alta, that you had mentioned Dr. Roger Lear, who has since passed away, I believe, a few years ago. But he was like the foremost expert in the world at one time on implant removal. And I've heard of a couple different people that have gone to him before he passed away, and that he was the premier scientist doctor in the world with the implant removal. And they had these implants analyzed at like the Los Alamos laboratory or something like that, and the results came back that it was a meteorite. They couldn't explain it any other way, but that it was a meteorite because it was made of different metals and alloys that were not of this earth. So anyway, I want to talk about your unknown and also about Dr. Roger Lear and his research.
Well, I can't offer much about Dr. Lear. We communicated very briefly back in 2002, I believe it was. I discovered that he'd written a book or was involved in a book called Alien in the Scalpel, I think is the title of it. And I'm in no man's land, Alabama at the time. I'd left Louisiana, and Chad and I reunited, and I left the quarter. We left everything behind and moved to Alabama. And so now I'm very lost because, I mean, I'm kind of rural out in the country and just lost. And so found this book, went to a big bookstore when they still existed in the large city, and found this book, and then discovered, you know, computers were fairly new. I'm very bad with them even now, much less back then, but was able to manage an email, and, you know, Dr. Lear made it very clear that he was interested, but that, of course, I had to get an X-ray. Again, these are extremely involved stories that takes so much time and explanation. They're not lightly said, and they're not easily said. So if I may, just trying to, again, for time constraint, we went through absolute insanity getting these X-rays of this object in my arm. By the time it was all said and done, Dr. Lear chose to not work with us. So we had a parting of the way, apparently. As it is said, we never went any further with him. But I did have the X-rays. So I had to, you know, just work completely on my own, doing whatever research I could on my own, and there's very little out there. And so I will offer, though, for anybody who's interested, if you're not aware of it, Whitley Strieber, who has an object, an unknown, I believe he uses the word implant, because I believe he remembers it being implanted. In my case, I have no memory of it being implanted. So as I've tried to get people to expand their minds in this language, just the consideration that, kind of jokingly I say, because I try to add some humor, Chad and I both do, as often as we can, because this is such an insane situation that we're in. But, how do we know it didn't come with a package? I don't know that I'm not born with this. We don't know anything. So that's my reason for calling mine an unknown. I have another one in my wrist now. So I refer to these as unknowns. Whitley Strieber, I believe, calls his an implant. It's in his ear. And he allowed his removal to be put on tape. So you can YouTube this. And what you'll discover is that when the doctor is in the ear, it's all on tape, with the tool, the scalpel or what have you, the tweezers that he's using to remove this object, the object is moving. And it won't allow itself to be captured. The doctor and Whitley both decided, and this was well over, I believe, 20 years ago when this was going on with him, to just leave the object there. Never again will he try to remove it. I just heard him the other day speaking, and him still indicating that, he's very comfortable with leaving it right where it is. So Chad and I came to the same conclusions. For me to leave this object, the upper arm, and about the time we were making that decision, I also remember very clearly saying to self and maybe out loud to Chad, let's say whatever or whoever is responsible for this doesn't put me through this again to replace it. And so just for lots of reasons, again, no book of rules here, we decided to leave it alone. And then it wasn't probably too long after me having that thought, I have another experience where I have another object that's in my wrist. Now, the object in my wrist won't X-ray, but it was detected through ultrasound. So they're very different, apparently. Also, because folks seem to think that they have a handle on all of this, and I find that very strange because, again, we're walking around living these truths, and we've got no answers. We had folks the other day try to connect me with what appears to be a physically very beautiful woman out of, I believe she's from Norway, or lives in Norway or Sweden, one or the other. I think Norway. Well, she's becoming the topic of conversation now because she has got what she identifies as at least, last count I knew of, 29 objects that are in her body that are all magnetized. She puts little magnets on her skin and they stick. Now, the problem we have here is mine does not react to a magnet. But I can guarantee you that the day I went in to get those x-rays, it chose to not take a picture the first 2 times. It terrified the doctor's office. I mean, terrified them. Because as Chad's saying, you can physically see this object. It's just under the top layer of skin. You can feel it. And it also would seem, I can't feel it, but it would seem to move down to the bone, choose to bury down to the bone, where only I would know it was there. But with this object sticking out of my arm like a big bug bite, the night I went in for those x-rays, it just gave me a perfect 2 times in a row skeletal x-ray of my arm with nothing there. Now, the x-ray tech can see this and can feel this in my arm. And now she's just wigging out. Now they just want us gone. They don't want to see us anymore. They're so sorry they opened that door. It's been a very difficult path for us in this regard. We're not trying to sound like victims, just repeating what we've been through.
John, did you have any more to ask, and we'll pass the talking stick to
I'm
Janet?
back. Yeah, I'm back.
He's back.
Oh, hey, Janet.
I'm ready to talk about implants. I have a clear memory of 2 implants, or at least a lot of action around it. I was going. I didn't go to school. Start school. I didn't want to start school, but my mother, started me in school, and so early on in that fall, it was probably what year? Kindergarten. I was born in 54, probably 59. 59. and I had this infection like came down, and my nose was just running profusely, and I kept sneezing and sneezing and sneezing, like I was trying to get rid of something. And so my mother kept me at home. But the summer before that, I was out playing in the yard, and I came running in the house, and I said, Mommy, I got stung by a bee. It wasn't a bee, but my mind couldn't wrap my mind couldn't figure out what it was. It was like a little miniature drone, and they had taken me on board, and they knocked me out, and they took me on board, and they put an implant behind my right ear. So my right nose, I've had chronic sinusitis all my life. My right ear, I'm hard of hearing, my right ear. And so fast forward years later, I'm trying to figure out what is this going on. I also had experiences where I had a scoop mark taken out of my right tibia, and it hurt for like 3 years. I was 16. So I finally got a hold of Bud Hopkins. I think it took a few years, and he wrote the book in the 70s or early 80s. I forget what year it was. And I read the book, and it says that there's a little drone they send down. It's kind of like a bee, and it buzzes around you, and it knocks you out. And that's what they use. They use for this one subject that he had, Bud Hopkins, and then she revealed that she had received a implant up her right sinus, an implant behind her right ear, and a scoop mark taken out of her right tibia, because that's where they get their DNA samples, and she had explanations for it all. And I went, holy, crap, that's exactly what happened to me. So, proof or not, I don't know what is proof, but to me that was something that was verifiable. But the thing on my leg hurt for like 2 to 3 years. People would accidentally hit it and send shocks up and down. What are they for? So years later, that was in the 50s and 60s. So years later, I'm in Hawaii, and I'm connected with a spiritual group, and there's a meeting going on in this lady's house, and I get to the meeting, and everybody disappears, and they make me go into the room with this lady who sits across from me, and she starts reading me. Now, she doesn't know that I'm an experiencer contactee. She doesn't know anything. I know nothing about her. She knows nothing about me, but she starts to read me. And she says, you have this implant. One is behind my right ear. The one behind my right ear is 2 parts. And she described it to a T. Now, I can't see it, but I can feel it. And so she said I have also one under my right arm and one under my, like in the lymph node there, another one behind my left ear. Anyway, she went right through all the different plants, and she says that they have very important functions. And she said the one is, of course, tracking, but the other one keeps you from getting severe STDs like AIDS, and every single one of them had a positive purpose. Now, I don't know if it was accurate or not, or true or real, but that was just very weird. And I took this reading on this, and I didn't pay a dime for it. And so another 3 years, and I'm at when the driver comes to do a workshop in Honolulu. And I said, okay, sign me up for that one. So I was very shy, and I just kind of held back, and it was like a 2-day workshop, and finally at the end I said, Whitley, I've got an implant behind my ear. I remember getting it. And he said, okay, come on up. And so I think I'm putting an answer. He says, I don't know, I've never seen anything like it. I don't know what it is. But that was in the early 90s. We know a lot more about it, and of course other people are now doing the implant scanning and removal. So that's kind of my implant story. I wonder if anybody else on this show, Karen or John, if you have an implant story that you'd like to share. But I certainly have my share of markings that I've earned in the morning from my journeys, and I've got another strange marking. So I'll pass the talking stick on to the next person. I guess, Karen, do you have any
Yep.
implant stories.
Yeah, I've told this story before where I really didn't know I had one, although I have a suspicion of when it was put in, but it was one like that up in my sinus area, really far high up in my sinus area. And I didn't know I had one till it broke, because I was going through a lot of energetic, change in my awakening. And I tell the story, I was having kind of a mind storm, so it was kind of saying that what I thought my beliefs were and what my experiences didn't match up. And so I was, sorting all of that out, and energetically it just like kind of rose up through my body. And when it hit my skull, so to speak, I basically heard a loud noise up in my skull pan, like it was a physical noise that sounded like a little piezoelectric alarm, like those Casio watch batteries. They chime with a real high-pitched noise. And I was like disoriented for, I don't know, at least an hour, and kind of for after that for I don't know, a couple months even, because I was ready to, say, hey, my beliefs need to be re-examined in relation to my, experiences. And then I literally had like a printout of a README file, like a mental image of a printout of a README file that we used to get with computer programs, and it told me what the implant was, told me that it was used to suppress me into believing in a hierarchy systems and to keep me from not questioning things. And, which was very strange, but I mean, the implants vary quite a bit from ones that the government does, ones that the ET do. Some of them I've heard have very positive benefits in stabilizing somebody's, autonomic systems, their enteric energy systems. Other people do feel bagged and tagged, like an animal gets a little transmitter in its, ear or on its wing or something like that. So there's a feeling of being tracked and watched and abducted repeatedly to see, what your development is. What I'd like to ask the question to our guests is, what is in the book that they would like people to know about specifically? Because I love the title, by the way. I think it's real intriguing, and I would immediately look at that book just reading the title. I think that's great. And just we told us a lot of your story, but like kind of what else besides that you hadn't had a chance to tell us, and generally speaking, kind of what's the basic outline if people want to find out.
Oh, and Karen, before you go on, I just want to say one more thing, and then go to the book thing. Is then years later, I went to a sinus doctor, a woman. She took an X-ray. Said, I have to study this. It's very weird. You don't have a sinus on one side. So she said that there's hardly any people, like maybe 0.5% or 1% of the world's population that have that. So they did something. Anyway, back to the book story, the book question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Janet. Go ahead, our guest. What should people know about your book?
Well, first of all, thank you again for mentioning the book. Or Abducted in the French Quarter, what we're most interested in is, first of all, for that word to kind of catch, because the word was created with help with our publisher. This is a new word that's never been used before, and we are trying to get it registered, through usage, if you will, as well as Chad and I are the good, the bad, and the indifferent of it all, the first that we're aware of, because I've worked very hard to research this, the first to come forward in print about these kinds of events happening in the French Quarter. The sadness of all of this is because, again, of abuse and the way people treat each other and the things that people say about each other. There are so many folks that I know live right here that are experiencing high strangeness in this kind of form that are afraid to come forward. So it's our highest desire for folks to have some safety and some freedom to at least reach out to us and let us know if they choose to, and we certainly understand if they don't, because this is a very scary ride coming forward. Our book was It started off much larger and longer than it is. We've never been involved in publishing a book before, so as pleased as we are with it, and our publisher and the folks who all were very involved in helping us put this together, there were many people who, not many, but there were a selected few who decided that the book needed to basically be reduced down to its small size, very brief descriptions leading you up to that night of missing time with the three of us. Also, I've never shared anything that would happen to me that night, so if anybody is interested, I believe that portion of the book is still in the book. They didn't cut that out. They seem to be very interested in making sure that that night was recorded. So if anybody, again, is interested, you'll hear a third story of the three of us of that night of missing time, and mine is a completely different event. And I would say, Chad, do you have any other thoughts about what you'd like for people to get out of this? Or
Yeah, just, letting people know that they're not alone, and there are things out there that we can't explain that I don't believe any of us have answers for.
That's excellent. I really applaud your goal of wanting to embolden people to speak out, because that's kind of why we do, the Experiencer's Path. As I explained before, philosophically, I believe in the Experiencer's Path to disclosure, meaning that we don't have to wait for the government to define, or the research community, which can be kind of overbearing, to define what has happened to us. We don't even need to define it ourselves, just share, like you're saying. You don't have any answers, and I don't think it's required to have any answers, just to share one with another. That is how human beings have solved problems ever since the beginning of time, is just talking to each other. And right now, generally speaking, we have a kind of a gag order on all of us, right? And have a lot of social pressure not to say anything. So it'd be interesting as your story gets out and people in your area read about it. If you might not hear, they'll probably come to you guys and tell you their stories, because that seems to be how it starts, right? And where we're at in the show is we've got about 26 more minutes. I wanted to make sure we go a couple more rounds. John, do you have more comments and questions for our guests?
I wanted to talk about implants or unknowns again. What was interesting in Dr. Roger Lear's work is he discovered, not always, but often with these implants, that they would connect to what you call proprioceptors inside of our bodies, and would become basically wired into our electromagnetic network that we humans possess. We have more voltage in us than a 9-volt battery. And so the implant would connect to the proprioceptors, which also are connected to the brain and feed off of impulses from the brain. And once you removed them, then they were rendered basically useless. They used the body as a source of power, which is amazing, and that there was no inflammatory response or reaction to these, which is impossible. You put some foreign body inside of a human body, and you're going to swell. You're going to have inflammation, just a natural reaction of the body. But with these implants, there was no swelling of tissue, which was completely and totally incredible. And then they started measuring and finding out that a lot of these implants had multiple oscillating frequencies that were emitted from the implant itself. And once you remove the implant from that human body, the oscillating frequency stopped. The whole thing basically just became inactive because it didn't have the power source anymore, which was the human body. So it's amazing how these things are engineered, and also incredibly small in size, also with incredible technical applications and abilities. But also going back to Whitley Strieber, I remember seeing him on an interview on television before, and he went to go get this implant taken out of his ear. And the doctor gets a scalpel, is about to just cut it out, wasn't even sure what it was, but knew there was some kind of foreign body in his ear. And he went to go cut it out, and the implant moved from the top of his ear down into his earlobe. And then after that happened, the doctor refused to remove it. And that I'm not positive, but I think he just chose to just leave it in there, that it wasn't really posing him any harm of any kind. So I thought that was pretty interesting and worth mentioning. But one thing that I have never seen in my life, that I've never personally seen in my life, is a Bigfoot. So I was hoping that Chad and Alta, you could tell us about your Sasquatch experience.
We love to share it with you. I pray it's not disappointing, because neither of us have actually seen one either.
Okay.
I had an experience in my backyard with a friend where we were terrorized by screams and hollers that sounded exactly like them, but there were so many of them that this is where people write me off as just crazy. But again, just repeating what I experienced, this was all taking place right after her and I had a UFO experience in the sky above my deck. This when we lived in, small town Alabama, which was right connected to, very close to an area that's a national forest. And so our experience was, we have this very brief UFO experience. And again, our behavior is strange, just describing it as we went through it. We decide we're going to go to bed now. We're not going to stay out there and have more. We're just like, oh, that was interesting. How fun was that? Let's go to bed. Chad's already downstairs in bed. We had another friend that was asleep on the couch. And, again, a lot to the story. But our experience was terrorizing. We were both positive we were dead. There is no other way to put it. And this was a wave of sound that came up out of those woods, up onto our property, up over the top of us. Now, again, I can't begin to describe in this short amount of time what all we experienced, but it was terrorizing. And just when we were positive, both of us positive, we were dead, because there's no way to survive anything like that. It was as if there was an invisible hand above my head, turned off a switch, and it just stopped. It stopped. It was like we were released. We went inside the house. We hugged each other. We were shaking from the inside out. We were beyond exhausted, and we went to bed. Now, at the time, I had a Great Dane and a Rottweiler Doberman, very large dogs, small ponies. They were completely asleep through this whole experience. Chad was asleep through this whole experience, and our friend that was just a few feet away on the couch was asleep through the whole experience as if everybody had been knocked out. There was no doubt to us that what we experienced, the whole town should have heard, without any exaggeration. So that was our personal experience in our backyard. From that day forward, as long as we lived there another couple years, I kept hearing what I call a hoot barker come out of that back 40, out of those woods. It would be an owl sound during the daytime. And I swear it was as if it waited for me to come out and sit on the deck. Now, if that's an owl, it liked me, because it would wait till I'd get out there and sit up on the deck, just taking in the air and the country around me, and it would start to hoot, but it was like it forgot how to hoot and would go into a barking, like a dog barking. I called a girlfriend up long distance. I had her on speakerphone, and I had her listen to this. She certainly heard it, so we came up with the name Hoot Barker, and we would just laugh, and it would scare me to death, and we would laugh, because I knew what I had experienced in that backyard. This invisible, I call them Sasquatchies. Again, I've changed the language just to take the terror out of so much of what's happened to us. Now, Chad's father and his adult brother, I'll have Chad share with you what they saw, and they saw Sasquatchy up close and personal, just around, not far from where we lived, around that forest that I just mentioned to you.
Yeah, it's my brother is taking my dad to Atlanta airport, And it was an early morning flight, couple of hour drive from where we were. So they're on Highway 20. They're going through Alabama, and they're going through the Talladega National Forest. And it's just starting to get light. And they said that they saw this, what they thought was a hitchhiker, you know, standing on the side of the road with his backpack on. And they noticed when they get closer that this thing actually stands up. And apparently it had been squatting on the side of the road. That they said that when they got closer, this thing stood up. They said it was probably 7-8 foot tall, very heavy, very hairy. They said as they passed, it kind of looked at them and pivoted and took a couple of steps into the woods. They said that, you know, now my brother told me this story. My dad really wouldn't talk about it, but they said that, you know, this thing just stands up and it's big, huge, and hairy, and walks off. And this was kind of a hot spot also, this area. The reports have been about Bigfoot.
And then I'll just move us forward. Chad and I leave Alabama in about 2011, 12. We sold our home. We liquidated most of our belongings and just kept our essentials and bought a used motorhome and loaded up our pooches, our small dogs at the time that we still have, not the Great Dane and the Rottie dog. They passed on, so we got smaller dogs. And decided to start traveling the Ohio Valley, all around the states of the Ohio Valley, doing metaphysical shows on the weekends where we could sell our art, our wearable art, me offer what I offer, and whatever else that we needed to do to just have freedom, to keep exploring and try to find others. So our first stop, and we're green as grass, again, naive, that's Chad and I. We decide to do something, we jump in head first, and we just do it. So we end up signing up. We're vendoring now at these shows around the country, around the Ohio Valley. First one is in Waverly, Ohio. And this is a ghosty operation where folks are coming in from all over to some haunted house or hotel in the middle of this small town, Ohio. We stay in a small, privately owned motorhome park at the very top of a mountain. Now, I didn't even know they had mountains in Ohio, but they do. Thank goodness it wasn't ginormously high, but it's a mountain, very windy. We're pulling a Jeep also, driving the motorhome, the Jeep, pulling a Jeep, and a trailer. So we're like a small locomotive going down the highway. We get up to the top of this. I'll try to speed this story up. We get up to the top of this place. We meet the couple who own the property. She's inherited it from her father. She's middle-aged. They're both middle-aged. He happens to be a prison guard at the local prison down at the bottom of the mountain that he's been with 20, 30 years. They've got children that are grown and gone. She proceeds to find out what we're there for. She finds out we're doing this ghosty thing. She then shares with us about how the Bigfoot Hunters, whatever that show is, I don't even know the name of that show, Finding Bigfoot, I think, how that crew has just been there prior to us getting there to interview her because apparently they're on the mountain. So we're like, wow, that's crazy. That's crazy because this is a small mountain. There's nowhere to go. So we're not afraid. We're at this stage, we're very excited. Now, I don't know how I can be excited after I've been terrorized, thinking they're going to eat us in my backyard. So I'm not terrified. I'm interested. I'm curious. I tell Chad, or it's first night in the park, late at night. We're surrounded in woods on the top of this mountain. They have a paved road that goes down the mountain that God knows how old it is, 100 years old, one lane. Chad's going to take the girls out to do their business late at night before bed. I'll have Chad share with you what happened.
yeah, we walked down this road, and then for half mile or so, and we start coming back, and it was dark. I mean, there's no street lights. It's dark. All I got is my flashlight, and I get pretty close back to the motorhome, and I hear what I call a grunt snort. It was like a just really guttural kind of, and and I'm a country boy, and I know what animal sound like, and I kind of, and the dogs, they stopped and looked, and I'm like, okay, come on, girls, and they didn't discuss it. They were ready to move on back into the house too, and they get in the house, and I tell Alta, I'm like, hey, I just heard something crazy I ain't never heard of, and the dogs jumped, and so Alta being Alta, she's like, I bet it's Bigfoot. I bet it's Bigfoot, or Sasquatchy, as she calls it. So, well, we decide we're going to offer him a plate, an offering, so we had made hot dogs and macaroni and cheese and different things, and so we made him a plate and put these little cinnamon jellies and some chocolate,
chips.
Yeah, potato chips. We made him a nice little plate lunch.
Hot dogs weenies in the bun.
Yeah. Well, there was hot dogs and everything. And so there's this old tree that's fallen over just outside the campsite there, just outside our window, bedroom window. And so I take it and I set this plate on there, kind of balance it. Plate. Yeah, just a paper plate, and I balance it up on top of the log, and it's pretty clear, so I can see if there's any tracks or anything. So we go to bed, and before I could even get my eyes open the next morning, I was just like, go check the plate. Not good morning, hey, wake up. No, go check the plate, So I get up and go outside. And
begrudgingly, he doesn't want to.
Yeah. It's like, at least you haven't wake up. But, I go outside.
But I'm like a little kid at Christmas.
Oh, yeah, she's, ready to open up the presents.
Just thinking of that, cookies for Santa, right?
Right.
Yeah, the cookies are going.
Hot dogs for Sasquatchy.
Yeah. So I go out there, and the plate is still sitting on this log. Now, this log's not very big, So if there was going to be disturbance, you would think it'd have fallen off. But yeah, it's just a little. Everything is gone off the plate except those little cinnamon jellies. There's no crumbs on the ground. There's no doggy footprints. There's no canine footprints. There's no footprint. There's no nothing. And we're like, if something wild had gotten it, they would have grabbed the plate and taken off, and there would be crumbs all over the place, but nothing. There was no crumb, no disturbance, but everything was gone off the plate except the cinnamon.
Oh,
apparently didn't like the cinnamon jellies.
Oh, that's something else. Well, I don't like them either if they're too hot. If my dog had got a hold of that likes to eat, your plate might even have a few bite marks in it because she goes crazy.
Right.
We're at about 10 more minutes, and I wanted to get Janet on here one more time. Janet, are you with us?
Well, I've been enjoying the storytelling. It's like, reminds me of when we used to go to Gettysburg and we would ghost stories around the campfire. I felt very good. It was very comfortable. I'm glad you had those experiences. I've never had any interaction with Bigfoot, although I know many people who have, and so I hope he's not eating people like some people say. But if that indicates he or she or it was intelligent and just picking stuff off the plate, so hopefully that's what was going on there. But they don't seem to really hurt people, but I have some people that are trying to tie in the disappearances from the parks with Bigfoot right now. So that story's still out there, and if anybody has any information, it'd be good to know about that. I've enjoyed the show. I'm sorry I couldn't be here the whole time. I had a bunch of interruptions, including the bee guy is here, so I haven't been able to really.
That's right. They got bees in their house. They're trying to get rid of bees. So that's a priority right there, for sure.
Well, my poor husband's been stung about 6 or 7 times now. So
man,
I've been stung twice. So anyway, I've enjoyed the show, and thank you, Chad and Alta. I interviewed you a couple years ago, and I'm glad you have a new book. And if you could send me, is it on Amazon? I'm going to go grab the image and promote it for you. Is that where your book is?
Right now, I'm working on a website. You can go through our Facebook page, and we can go through PayPal there.
Okay, yeah. So maybe Karen could get the link so we can put that up on our. We do create a web page.
Do you have a Facebook page specifically for the book, or is it you guys, Chad and Alta? What Facebook page are we trying to go for?
Or abducted. In the French Quarter. It's
ORB ducted. Okay, in the French Quarter. Okay, so there's people go on there on Facebook, check it out. It sounds amazing. I want to get John on here one more time. John, are you with us?
Yeah, earlier today, Chad and Alta had sent me a number of emails, and I went ahead and forwarded them on to you, Karen, and to Janet. But it's fairly comprehensive. It goes through all their different web pages, their Facebook pages, a digital copy of the front and back cover of their book. I like the artwork on the book. I think the artwork is really cool. Question for you, Alta. The female that's almost like in that alien onesie kind of jumpsuit that often they're depicted in, is that a likeness of you? Or is that a likeness, or who's that a likeness of, actually?
It's just the artist's interpretation of the blonde being that I was with. Again,
okay.
I didn't have an opportunity tonight to talk about my part of the experience, but in my experience, she is who I'm with. And I'd like to just notice we're at the end of this now. Chad never encountered her in his experience. He encountered probably at least 4 different types of beings, but she was not one of them. And in my experience, of course, she was my only experience in terms of a different being besides myself.
Oh, and something else is I got an offer on my house today. So it's possible.
Hey, John.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to translate or not. This guy's supposed to come by either tomorrow or Sunday and look at my house, and hopefully that all goes through. And if it does, ladies, my plan, Chad and Alta, you may not, but Alta does, that I'm basically going to sell all my stuff and move out to Sedona, Arizona. I have a free place to stay out there. And on the way out there, I basically invited myself over to Chad and Alta's house, and they said, yeah, come on out. So as I'm driving out west, I did. I just straight up and just imposed. And then they're like, oh, you're not imposing. But I'm like, if I could sleep on a couch or a chair or anything, that would be great. And then I want to go to the French Quarter. I mean, I'll have perfect tour guides, and then they can show me exactly, the corner of Decatur where all this took place. I'd be really interested to see all that.
Oh, my gosh, you never know what might happen when experiencers get together. A lot of energy there. We can take a quick minute or so to tell any events or anything else you wanted to add to that. We'll just go quick round robin. Janet, I know you got some event coming up. If you can say real quick what you got coming up.
I'm heading over to Vegas, so come on down and meet us at the MUFON Symposium. Let's see, I should have pulled it up to see where it is. It's going to be an incredible lineup of the secret space program people, which is one of my favorite topics. And we've got 3 tables so far with our group, and we keep expanding. So I'm going to be sitting with Misha Johnson, who's out of Vegas, and she runs all these experiencer support groups on the internet and one out of her home. And let's see who else is coming. Joanne Richards is going to be on the other side. Len Caston. Carol McLeod is there with her little alien figurines and jewelry that you can wear. They're very, very awesome. I have 5 or 6. No. Okay, I just pulled up UFOD Symposium. Let me real quick. Richard Dolan, Martha Canlis, Michael Schratt, Michael Sala, William Talkins, Corey Good, Gary McKinnon, John Brandenburg, Cheryl Jones, James Woodard, Bob Wood, Andrew Pishago, and Debbie Ziegemeyer are the presenters. And the hotel is let's see, come on over, the JW Marriott in Las Vegas Resort and Spa, very lovely facility. Come on over. We've got a bunch of our books. I have a new book out, Marduk, King of the Earth, and another new book. I will stop with this. On Tantra. I'm also a Tantra teacher. Tantra for all chakras. I'm going to be doing a workshop weekend in Austin in October. I'm getting all those links up today and tomorrow as we speak. Oh, and then in Vegas, we're going to do an experiencer group at Mies Johnson's facility there. She's got a little clubhouse at their trailer park where it can hold about 30, 40 people, so it's going to be limited. And we're going to take people into a deeper process to uncover the mystery of themselves and their encounters and experiences that might be hidden within the depths of their psyche and subconscious. Join us. Okay, that's enough for that. Thank you.
Yeah, we kind of ran out of time. I'll just tell everybody real quick. My partner Brett and Brett and Ken Johnson are going to Dulce, and I am going to Roswell, so look me up on Facebook. And I want to thank everybody for a wonderful show, and I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And everyone have a happy weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Aquarian Radio Friday nights, The Experiencer Path. Thanks to the artists from freemusicarchive.org, Ketsa for Live With No Fear, and Scott Holmes, Mother Nature. You have been listening to the Aquarian Radio Network.
Welcome to the Total Wireless Store, where total confidence awaits.
My wife loves when I DJ our car rides, but overages get in the way of my groove.
Don't worry. You got this with Total Wireless. Right now, get 50% more data when you bring your number to any qualifying service plan starting at $35. All in the nation's best 4G LTE network.
Wiki, 50% more?
Now go find that perfect DJ name.
New York. Discover the Total Wireless stores and get total confidence. The latest phones, the best network, all at great prices. Ends January 2nd, 2019. $35 plans and up. Excludes ports from TracFone Wireless Inc. brands. Terms at TotalWireless.com.